These days, after a night of drinking and celebrations, a lot of people make a late night stop at some sort of greasy spoon, such as Taco Bell, Skyline, or something like that. But where did people go 100 years ago before some of these late night staples were established? Well, the answer to that is a true Cincinnati curiosity. Before Prohibition, every Cincinnati saloon prominently advertised free lunch or a Wienerwurst with each drink. The sausage man visited Cincinnati saloons all day long, carrying a large bucket full of savory links, trailed by a small boy toting bread, salt, and pepper. Eventually, however, midnight chimed, the saloons closed, and hungry men prowled the late-night streets looking for something to eat. Midnight diners found a banquet crowding the sidewalks. Along Vine Street was a mobile food court of vendors offering tasty treats to late-night diners. A quick trip outside any Cincinnati saloon found the sandwich cart offering a variety of fillings between thick slices of German rye bread, usually ham, chicken, and cheese. In a time when brand names were uncommon, late-night customers looked for individual peddlers known for the quality of their service. Vendors sold hot pretzels while walking the streets with heavy baskets hanging from their shoulders or dozens of hot pretzels speared on a long pole. The peanut man roasted his salted wares as he patrolled the avenues, followed by the popcorn man with his equally aromatic cart. The tato man offered hot-baked potatoes heated by a charcoal stove. Another mainstay of the night owl dining menu was the Wienerwurst, not yet called the hot dog. It was common to find these vendors taking street orders so late that milk wagons were already making their rounds. For those midnight diners with a sweet tooth, Cincinnati vendors offered Hokey Pokey, a concoction almost like ice cream. Some reputable Hokey Pokey peddlers actually used some milk in their product, believe it or not. The Waffle Man also hawked cheap, sweet treats. Hungry but health-conscious patrons could always opt for an apple. Cincinnati's pinnacle late-night delicacy before Prohibition was the hot tamale. Patrons gobbled the spicy Mexican delicacies, whether sold from a wheeled wooden cart or from a large can carried by a hot tamale vendor who was always a man and often blind. Cincinnati even had its own short-lived tamale manufacturing plant at 501 West Court Street in the West End. The tamale manufacturing company sold tamales wholesale at 25 cents a dozen. Indications are that the street vendors sold tamales for a nickel apiece, a pretty good markup. At least one Cincinnati tamale man, John Brock, earned enough to buy a fine house on Broadway. And joining us now is the king of curiosities, our good buddy Greg Hand. Hey, Greg, so good to have you with us this morning.
Always a pleasure.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Were the streets crowded with all these food carts?
Even more than crowded, it was a dynamic situation. There were obviously around the city good places to sell your potatoes or tamales or whatever you were selling, and there were places that didn't get quite the traffic. And so these food cart vendors used to engage in fisticuffs all over the city to get the best corners to sell their wares. And the newspapers are just full of stories of people fighting for a good location near the best saloons in town. So yes, it was very crowded.
So let me be clear about this. Are you saying there was no mustard for the hot dogs?
It seems sacrilegious now that there was not only no mustard, no sauerkraut, any of the toppings for your Wienerwurst, but all the reports from back in the 1800s, the pre-Prohibition days, is that you got a Wienerwurst, and then in back of you there was a kid with a slice of rye bread and some salt and pepper, and that was what you put on your Wienerwurst. The whole idea of hot dogs really didn't develop until later on at one of the World's Fairs, I believe the St. Louis World's Fair. And that finally brought the mustard and the toppings into Cincinnati. But back in the day, no, it was rye bread, salt, and pepper.
So how exactly was Cincinnati introduced to tamales?
There were two wars that brought Cincinnatians into contact with the territory where tamales were sort of the regional food. One was the Mexican War in the 1840s. And a lot of Cincinnatians were enlisted in the Army fighting in that war, which took them into Texas and Arizona and those sorts of territories. But I think it was really the Civil War that brought the tamales into Cincinnati. Civil War also involved Texas and the Southwest. And it's shortly after the Civil War that you start seeing tamales show up in Cincinnati, as they probably traveled up the Mississippi River from Texas through New Orleans up to Cincinnati.
Greg, thanks so much for bringing us this story. And of course, as always, it's a pleasure having you with us.
And yet again, bon appetit.